So talking about politics in science, it's pretty uncomfortable because you're sort of supposed to be objective and you're supposed to, be data reliant, and a lot of it is supposed to remove your personal beliefs as much as possible so that what you're coming up with in your studies and your analysis is separate from bias. But everybody has a bit of internal bias. The point is to try to minimize it. But at a certain point in politics, like, issues are political, but that doesn't mean that they have to be partisan. So that in order to fix something like the climate crisis, like, we need to move beyond just like driving less or flying less or eating less meat, which are all things that we should be doing to try to tackle these sorts of things. But we also have to get political about it. And it makes people like me pretty uncomfortable because it's not something that I think that I've been kind of acclimatized to do. But in this country, because of the way the Republican Party has taken its stance on the climate crisis and the way that they have systemically allowed fossil fuel money to infiltrate their ranks and sort of work their propaganda machine, unfortunately, for lots of people with views that might not be like in the Democratic Party, who aren't satisfied with the current Democratic Party, if you're phone banking, if you're text banking, if you're writing letters, like, in this election, you're going for Joe Biden. In state level elections, you're going for Democratic senators. And if you can find Republican exceptions, great. But in this instance, unfortunately, that's where a lot of this lies.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually interesting. I was directed to a piece earlier today where the White House actually recently, I believe within this the past decade, finally got back to using solar panels at the White House. I believe it was first put into place with President Carter in 79. And then when the Reagan administration took over, it was, yep, right out the door. And then it was about what? A little bit less than, what was it, about 30 years or so until President Obama brought them back. And the amount of energy and waste just from the White House, it was obviously obscene. I believe they said about, it was like over 200,000 pounds of coal being burned basically over that period of time. And that is the highest power that you hold in the land. Like, that is the commander in chief, that is the executive. We have to hold people accountable. We can't just, like, we of course need to work on our individual footprints, but we as a nation have to see that there is an issue before us. There's a reason why there's a countdown clock. There's a reason why you see on the West Coast, it's literally red. It looks like the apocalypse. Like, that is absolutely insane. And I know I was watching Pod Save America, and a lot of the news cycles seem to cover just what's in DC and what's in New York. But we don't face those issues here, so it seems like it's not as big a deal. But there are places that, even in the Midwest, terrible storms. And these are all issues that we have to find a way to combat each and every day. So, in terms of advocacy, in terms of kind of like forging that battle and kind of like thinking about the economic side, because obviously that's a major issue for uh, the Republican Party. How do we go about that? How do we go about bridging the gap and really trying to find a bipartisan solution to this issue?
One of the biggest differences, it seems, between the current Republican and Democratic parties are their approaches towards government intervention and government spending. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of tragic when it comes to climate change because we've delayed so many decades, the amount of investment and spending that's required to even just, like, we're talking about like preserving life on our planet, not even like making things better or like improving things, like, is so massive that really the only person or the only actor that can spend at that level, like at that scope and scale, is the federal government, in my opinion. And so what that means is, huge spending that Republicans don't want to support because it looks like big government, and the Democrats then have a hard time passing or even can't get behind themselves. I found it funny last night in the debate. Joe Biden's kind of like hiding behind this Green New Deal. and then Trump's accusing him of spending 100 trillion. Like, we wish it was 100 trillion. It's 2 trillion. Bernie Sanders' plan was 16 trillion for a Green New Deal. So maybe we should like take Trump's hit there. But I think that's one of the biggest obstacles I see is like, how do we get past some of that partisanship around like just sort of ideologically like what that spending means when it's and sort of start doing the things that need to happen. And it kind of comes down to the question of like, is it, yeah, it's expensive, but like it's also costly not to act, and like expensive compared to what? Like New York City being underwater is also expensive, or dealing with these wildfires is also expensive. So I think it's unfortunate that the debate gets kind of framed so narrowly, because it's hard, again, because of the issue of climate change and how sort of like vague it can be, or enormous it can be. It's hard to sort of like pinpoint these different issues. So that's just one thing I see. I'd be curious to hear what Dan and Tim have to say.
Yeah, I could say that. I think that, Tim, you look like you're about to speak. You got
No,
it?
no, I was just trying to think of thoughts.
I think one of the biggest issues that I see in the way is that short-termism is a bipartisan issue, right? Like Marie-Therese is saying, it's very expensive in the short term to make these kinds of investments, to get back into the Paris Agreement, and spend money so that other countries are able to, combat their own climate economics. But in the long term, when these politicians won't be in office anymore, there'll be extraordinary effects, extraordinarily detrimental effects. So I think it's really going to take an effort to inform people on the long-term effects and how those are going to affect your children, and appeal to some aspect of humanity like that. It's definitely a harder topic and something you have to write down. But I think maybe that comes into it. And like in the chat, as Fishy said, I feel like a huge challenge is that it's the entire planet, and we need the entire planet to be on board with making changes and enforcing them. And so what kind of steps can we take to do so? Well, the Paris Climate Agreement is a good start. But I think in the really more powerful, the EU, the United States, Canada, maybe Brazil, probably not Brazil,